Welcome to the Art of Rhetoric, 10 Principles of Persuasive Speech. I'm Paul, coming to you from Brooklyn. Today we are going to take a look at the art of persuasive writing. We're going to look at 10 principles of rhetoric, and then we're going to analyze an essay by Professor Gordon Marino called A Life Beyond Do What You Love. And we will look for the application of these rhetorical devices in Professor Marino's fine essay. Professor Marino teaches philosophy at St. Olaf College, and we thank him for the use of his essay. Okay, first, let's look closely at 10 powerful rhetorical devices. Let's get started. Principle number 1 is logos. Logos, or the use of reason or logic, is the fundamental persuasive tool of the writer. It is the strongest weapon that the writer has. The use of argument, the use of analysis, and deductive and inductive reasoning. Notice here the difference. Deductive reasoning is deriving a particular instance from the general law, whereas inductive reasoning is deriving a general law from particular instances. You might, in a very simplified way, think of the sciences, right? Trial and error, empirical observation, the scientific method as exemplifying inductive reasoning, right? So we look at particular instances and we derive the general law, whereas much of philosophy is sort of deriving particular instances from general laws or premises that are put forth. So logos, or the appeal to reason, is in fact the strongest and most important weapon of the writer. Next, rhetorical device number 2, ethos. So in ethos, we're appealing to the authority, the credibility of the author. In other words, the author has to convince us, the reader, of his character, of his trustworthiness, if you will. So in this sense, it's an ethical appeal. Is the author a good guy? Is the author someone whom we should believe? Another form of ethos is citing other credible experts, citing masters and scholars and great thinkers of the past, or what have you. Next, number 3, pathos. So pathos is the third of the great trifecta: logos, ethos, and pathos. Pathos, as you see here, is the appeal to emotion. So the author is appealing to his reader's sympathies. The author is trying to get the reader to feel what the author feels. So when you reach those very detailed passages where you feel the author sort of pulling on your heartstrings, that is pathos. The author's trying to get you to imaginatively suffer as he or she has suffered. And that attempt, the use of vivid descriptive language to describe a trauma, for example, is pathos. It makes us feel. So notice those big 3: logos, the appeal to reason; ethos, the ethical appeal or the appeal to authority; and pathos, the appeal to emotion. These are the very backbone of rhetoric, of persuasive speech. And we will look at these in the essay after we finish the list. But first, rhetorical device number 4, the thesis. Of course, you're probably familiar with the thesis at this point. It is the focus statement of an essay. Essentially, it's the argument. And all good essays have some sort of argument in them. Next, rhetorical device number 5, distinctio, a fancy Latin term for definition of terms, right? For clarification. Explicit reference made to multiple meanings of a word, generally to remove ambiguity. So, for example, in the essay we are about to read, we will see the author draw our attention to the multiple meanings of higher power. What a higher power means for you, the reader, and what it means for the author. And the author will make clear what he believes is his higher power, which he goes on to argue is a sense of justice and equality. So when the author makes this kind of distinction, right, makes a clear distinction between his idea of higher power and what the reader may believe. Number 6, Procatalepsis, a fancy word for addressing counter-arguments. This can be done in an entire section of a longer paper, but it can also be done seamlessly within the flow of the general argument in a shorter essay. It permits the main argument to continue moving forward while taking into account points or reasons opposing either the train of thought or its final conclusions. An important weapon, this one, Procatalepsis. You want to address arguments you know are going to be brought against your own argument as succinctly and deftly as possible. Rhetorical device number 7, irony, very effective. Irony is a statement that says the opposite of what it means. A situation or statement characterized by significant difference between what is expected or understood and what is actually happening or what is meant. Irony is often humorous. You could compare it with sarcasm. Sarcasm in the sense of, when a kid strikes out and the sort of mean coach says, "Nice hit," right? That's irony. And authors employ irony to make their point more emphatic. Number 8, rhetorical question. You may be familiar with this one. A rhetorical question is a question whose answer is so obvious no reply is really expected. So it's often a question that sort of answers itself. It's designed to produce an effect, to make a statement. Primarily, the answer to the question is the statement, right? And we'll again see use of the rhetorical question in the ensuing essay. Number 9, Hypophora, which is a fancy term for raising a question and then proceeding to answer it, often at length. I read an essay last night by Paul Krugman. He was reviewing Timothy Geithner's book, Stress Test, and he employed this method multiple times in the essay. Why did the economy collapse in 2008? And then he went on to answer that question. What was Timothy Geithner's role? And then he went on to answer that question. Very effective tool for the author to indicate the structure, to signal to the reader of coming content. Okay, and last, rhetorical device number 10, anecdote. It's just a brief story or tale. It's in the first person. The idea it's an illuminating tale. It tells us something important about the subject matter at hand. And we will see this in our essay. Now let us turn our attention to the essay. Going beyond, do what you love. So I have linked to the essay below, as well as included a PDF file with my annotations for your perusal. I recommend you check them out and read along as we work. Here we go. A Life Beyond Do What You Love by Gordon Marino. Student advisees often come to my office. I'm going to stop right there. In the first half a sentence, the writer is appealing to authority here. This is the use of ethos. He is establishing his position as a man whom students seek out for advice, right? Student advisees often come to my office rubbing their hands together, furrowing their brows, and asking me to walk along with them as they ponder life after graduation. Just the other day, that's an anecdote. That phrase, just the other day, cues anecdote. And notice how the author, Marino, is going to introduce his rather weighty or hefty subject matter with a light anecdote. Just the other day, a sophomore made an appointment because he was worrying about whether he should become a doctor or a philosophy professor. A few minutes later, he nervously confessed that he had also thought of giving stand-up comedy a whirl. A little humor there. Not exactly one of the devices we're studying today, but an effective way to make a point. As an occupational counselor, again an appeal to the author's authority there, my knee-jerk reaction has always been, quote, what are you most passionate about? Sometimes I'd even go into a sermonette about how it is important to distinguish between what we think we are supposed to love and what we really love. But is, quote, do what you love wisdom or malarkey? There the author has presented the main question of the essay, the central investigation, right? That's a Hypophora, right? Now he's going to go on and answer this question in the ensuing paragraphs. Let's see. In a much-discussed article in Jacobin magazine early this year, the writer, Miya Tokumitsu, argued that the, quote, do what you love ethos, so ubiquitous in our culture, is in fact elitist, because it denigrates work that is not done from love. We have another appeal to authority by citing another writer, and we have the thesis. Essentially, Marino has lifted the thesis from Tokumitsu, and the thesis is that our culture undervalues work, and work from duty, he's going to go on to argue, and by saying just do what you love, sort of promotes a kind of elitist view of work. It also ignores the idea that work itself possesses an inherent value. Here we hear the author's own formulation, the author's own thesis. Listen, this is his main point, the focus statement of the essay. It also ignores the idea that work itself possesses an inherent value, and most importantly, severs the traditional connection between work, talent, and duty. Duty. So he's ended the sentence with the most emphatic word, and that word duty is essentially the investigation at hand. Continuing. When I'm off campus and informally counseling economically challenged kids in Northfield, Minnesota, again, appeal to authority, appeal to the ethical character, right, of the author. He is a man who spends his time challenging and counseling economically challenged kids, etc., right? So we get a sense of his credibility. We get a sense that he's a good guy, and then he has experience. A city of about 20,000, the theme is not do what you love. Many of them are used to delivering papers at 5 a.m., slinging shingles all day, or loading trucks all night. I would argue this is an appeal to emotion. The use of specific detail here, the vivid detail of slinging shingles all day, it makes us feel for those workers. It makes us maybe even imaginatively feel what it's like to be up at 5 a.m. delivering newspapers or loading trucks all night. There's a sense of the author playing to the audience's imagination, to their ability to sympathize with such work, with such tasks. They are accustomed to doing whatever they need to do to help out their families. For them, the notion of doing what you love or find meaningful is not the idea that comes first to mind, nor should it. We put our heads together and consider what are you best at doing, or what job would most improve your family's prospects. Maybe being licensed as a welder or electrician. Maybe the military. Passion and meaning may enter into the mix of our chats with the understanding that they sharpen your focus and make you more successful. My father didn't do what he loved. a little bit of an anecdote, but really just telling some personal story now. He labored at a job he detested so that he could send his children to college. Was he just unenlightened and mistaken to put the well-being of others above his own personal interests? What is that? Rhetorical question, right? Immediately, the answer is no. We know the father wasn't unenlightened or mistaken to put the well-being of others above his own personal interests, right? The answer comes kind of automatically, and in that way, it's rhetorical. It makes the point more emphatic. The posing the question. It might be argued. So here, the author, I believe, starts to dig in to logos, to the use of reason, to the use of argumentation, which is, in fact, at the heart of his essay. That, and I would say along with the appeal to authority. It might be argued that his idea of self-fulfillment was taking care of his family. But again, like so many other less than fortunate ones, he hated his work, but gritted his teeth and did it well. It could, I suppose, be argued that my father turned necessity into a virtue, or that taking the best care you can of your family is really a form of self-service. But getting outside yourself enough to put your own passions aside for the benefit of a larger circle, be it family or society, does not come naturally to everyone. Not all take this path. You may know the tale of Dr. John Kitchen, a.k.a. Shlomo, who quit his medical practice for his true passion, skating along the boardwalk of San Diego's Pacific Beach. But is it ethical for the doctor to put away his stethoscope and lace up his skates? Question. That is a Hypophora, right? You can hear how the author is presenting this question as what he is about to answer for us, the reader. Not quite a rhetorical question. Is it ethical for the doctor to put away his stethoscope and lace up his skates? Think about it. Maybe it's okay for a doctor to become a slow-mo skateboarding on the beaches of San Diego. I don't know immediately, which makes it not a rhetorical question, but a hypophora. Moving on. Thinkers as profound as Kant, so we have a classic appeal to authority, citing a well-known, reputable source. Thinkers as profound as Kant have grappled with this question. In the old days, before the death of God, the faithful believed that their talents were gifts from on high, which they were duty-bound to use in the service of others. I note here a reiteration of the thesis, right? This sense of duty, this sense of using our talents being a duty, which is where we were in the original thesis. It also ignores the idea that work itself possesses an inherent value and, most importantly, severs the traditional connection between work, talent, and duty. So here we hear him representing his thesis, using those key words, talent, duty, and work. Back to Kant. In his treatise on ethics, the groundwork for the metaphysics of morals, Kant ponders, suppose a man, quote, finds in himself a talent which might make him a useful man in many respects, but he finds himself in comfortable circumstances and prefers to indulge in pleasure rather than take pains in enlarging his happy natural capacities. Should he? The should he is Marino's. It's a hypophora. He's going to answer the question. Kant huffs no. One cannot possibly will that letting one's talents rust for the sake of pleasure should be a universal law of nature. Quote, as a rational being, he writes, he necessarily wills that his faculties be developed, since they serve him and have been given him for all sorts of purposes. To Kant, it would be irrational to will a world that abided by the law, do what you love. Using Kant to reinforce his thesis there at the paragraph's end. Perhaps, unlike Kant, You do not believe that the universe is swimming with purposes. Here we see Procatalepsis. The author is anticipating an objection of yours, the reader. Perhaps you do not believe that the universe is swimming with purposes. Well, if you think so, I will respond to such a train of thought. Then, back to Marino, is do what you love or do what you find most meaningful the first and last commandment? Hypophora, again. Right? He's going to answer the question. Not necessarily. Next, Marino moves into what I identify as the heart of his reasoning, the heart of his logos. The abstract argument is coming now in the next paragraph. The faith that my likes and dislikes or our sense of meaning alone should decide what I do is part and parcel with the gospel of self-fulfillment. There's a premise. Philosophy has always been right to instruct that we can be as mistaken about our views on happiness as anything else. A bit of deductive reasoning here. Using the general law, namely philosophy has always been right? The general law that we are often wrong. It's a kind of a funny general law. We are often wrong about things, about what we think happiness is. So given that, we're probably, or we may be wrong about what we think self-fulfillment is. What vocation means, what we should do for work. Suppose that true self-fulfillment comes in the form of developing into, quote, a mature human being. There is the author's thesis. This is, of course, not to claim that we ought to avoid work that we love doing just because we love doing it. That would be absurd. A deft moment of procatalepsis there, right? The author considers the argument, well, should we never do what we love then? He says, that's absurd. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that perhaps the arbiter of our vocation should be duty, and not only this notion of do what we love. For some, a happy harmony exists or develops in which they find pleasure in using their talents in a responsible, other-oriented way. The universally recognized paragons of humanity, the Nelson Mandelas, Dietrich Bonhoeffers, and Martin Luther Kings, an appeal to outside authorities, right? Again, one of the central strategies of this essay is an appeal to authority. The universally recognized paragons of humanity did not organize their lives around self-fulfillment and bucket lists. They, no doubt, found a sense of meaning in their heroic acts of self-sacrifice, but they did not do what they were doing in order to achieve that sense of meaning. They did, like my father and some of those kids from town, what they felt they had to do. Notice the power of recalling the anecdotes of the writer's father and those kids from that Minnesota town, and how it's seamlessly interwoven here with the authority of Dr. Martin Luther King. And so the combination of ethos and anecdote here in this paragraph. Marino goes on. Dr. King taught that every life is marked by dimensions of length, breadth, and height. Here we have a metaphor, an extended metaphor, and this is another rhetorical device, not on our original list, but I'm going to give you a list at this video's end of a whole host of other rhetorical devices that I recommend you look into. Length refers to self-love, breadth to the community and care of others, and height to the transcendent, to something larger than oneself. Most would agree with Dr. King's prescription that self-fulfillment requires being able to relate yourself to something higher than the self, and here a deft application of distinctio. Traditionally, that something higher was code for God, but whatever the transcendent is, it demands obedience and the willingness to submerge and remold our desires. So, the author recognizes that for many people, the definition of higher power is varied, right? So there are multiple meanings. For you, it may mean God. For you, it may mean beauty. And for another, equality and justice, which is the definition that Marino goes on to give for his own sense of a higher power. But more importantly, because of the ambiguity, Marino uses distinctio. He calls attention to the multiple meanings. And to remove the ambiguity, he says, I'm talking about whatever is transcendent for you, the reader, whatever that may be. And he goes on then to define for himself what higher or higher power means in the ensuing paragraph. Perhaps you relish running marathons. The author speaks to the reader directly here at the end for added effect. Perhaps you even think of your exercise regimen as a form of self-improvement. But if your something higher is, say, justice and equality, those ideals might behoove you to delegate some of the many hours spent pounding the track on tutoring kids at the youth center. Notice again how the author's use of distinctio is very powerful here in the essay's close. If your something higher is a sense of justice and equality, then you might think of devoting your work hours to duty more. And then the author ends the essay with his thesis. Our desires should not be the ultimate arbiters of vocation. Sometimes we should do what we hate, or what most needs doing, and do it as best we can. So, notice how Professor Marino has used all of these powerful rhetorical devices. A great deal of logos, of argumentation, of philosophical reasoning. A healthy dose of ethos. He's convinced us of his authority, of his experience, of his trustworthiness, as well as cited the expertise of luminaries such as Kant and Dr. King. He's also appealed to our emotions through the use of pathos, describing his father's life, or the challenges that those kids in Minnesota face. He's used thesis, Procatalepsis, Hypophora, Rhetorical Question, Anecdote. He's used all of these devices together to make a convincing whole. And I encourage you to try this, to put these rhetorical devices into your own writing so that you too can persuade someone of your perspective. Before we go, I want to leave you with this list of other rhetorical devices that we did not consider today, such as metaphor. We saw that with Dr. King's extended metaphor. But look at this long, powerful list. Simile, litotes, antithesis, amplification, and so on. I encourage you to investigate these and to add them to your repertoire. Add them to your collection of rhetorical weapons. Okay, I wish you luck in your writing. Thank you for watching. It's Paul, coming from Brooklyn. This has been The Art of Rhetoric, and I'll see you in the future.